Greetings everyone, welcome back to Blade Bias. Today I have spent some time with the Bxndxge Knives Stitch V2 and I have some thoughts. But before I go into those thoughts, I need to change the disclosure that we made because in the last video I told you that this was a pass around that would be sent off after I'm done checking it out. And that was true. That was, as far as I understood this to be, completely true at the time that I made that video. But since I made that video, Bxndxge reached out to me and said, hey, if you owned your own Stitch V2, would you mess with it a lot more? You know, like change the weights and stuff. And I said, yeah, typically I don't like to change out weights or disassemble knives that are on loan to me because one simple stripped screw or losing one part in a carpet ruins the pass around for everyone else. And I just don't want to do that. I just want to mess with it and move on. So, you know, yeah, if I own my own, for sure. And then he said, great, you can keep the blue Stitch V2 then. And I was flabbergasted, still am. So huge thank you to Bxndxge for giving me the Stitch V2. I'm so thrilled to own one of your knives at long last. I should have owned one a long time ago, but balisongs are an expensive thing. This thing is going to retail for about 450 to 475 USD, I believe that Bxndxge told me. And for that price, for what you're getting, I don't think it's terribly unreasonable. I don't think that this is going to be a Stitch V2, I don't think that this is going to be a Sliff T V2 level deal that everyone needs to go out and check this out right now because this is just a crazy deal. But I like it. That being said, Bxndxge specifically said that he didn't want to like tell me he was sending one out to me because he didn't want my opinions to be colored in my first impressions video. And I respect him for that. And the fact that he gave this to me is not going to affect my overall thoughts on this thing. I'll try not to let it affect me too much. And I don't think it has because my opinions have not really changed too much from my first impressions video. In my first impressions video, I said that this thing with one more weight would be friggin' incredible. Unfortunately, I was wrong in that. So I flipped it with no weights for a little bit. And I was getting more used to it. I was certainly getting a little more, it was getting a little more consistent. I was getting far more familiar with it and I was enjoying it. But the second that Bxndxge let me know that he was giving this to me, I broke it open and I put a weight in. And it wasn't a crazy bad process to take it apart. My biggest complaint with this thing by far is the T8 hardware being used at the end of the handles. T8 smaller than T10, which is used up here in the pivots. It strips easier, but to Bxndxge's credit, he doesn't crank them down and apply Loctite to them and make it so that it strips the second that the end user wants to change anything on their balisong. So it was just a really quick little quarter turn, take the screws out, loosen up the pivots a little bit, and suddenly I had access to the amazing zippy spacers that Bxndxge collabed with Zippy to create, which of course uses Zippy's tried and true tungsten ball method. And I threw a tungsten ball in there. And what I hadn't considered was the fact that this weight system doesn't improve handle weight across the whole handle like I was hoping would make it better in the initial first impressions video. What it actually does is just add more weight to the end of the handles, which rather than making the knife more handle biased, it kind of just makes the knife carry more momentum because you have more weight further down the end of the handles. It gathers more inertia, it's harder to stop, it's harder to get going. It ultimately just kind of ended up slowing down the knife a little bit. And I only flipped it with one weight like that for about 10 minutes before I decided that it was even more inconsistent than it was before. Because at this point I had gotten used to how it flipped with no weights in it. So I took it back apart again and I put in both weights, hoping that it would increase the handle bias a little bit more. And all it really did was further slow down the knife. So it didn't really fix the balance as much as I was thinking that it would, because it didn't affect the balance nearly at all. This is still a very neutral-ish feeling balisong. Fans well, choker fans well, while still maintaining a good amount of chaplain ability, and it sticks to your fingers really well on rollover base tricks. But now it just flips a little more slowly because the handles carry more inertia. That being said, it did affect it more than I thought. I always get surprised with those tungsten balls that Zippy uses, how much it affects things. It's not a crazy amount, mind you, but for these tiny little balls, it changes quite a bit. So, if that didn't fix the balance, where do I overall stand on the Stitch V2? This, I still have both weights in here. It's good. I enjoy how it flips. It's neutral enough. It's fun enough. This is a Kukri blade, which Kukri is my favorite blade profile. If it weren't for the Impusa, the Stitch would probably be one of my favorite Kukri blades of all time, but it's still very far up there. I really like the design language and overall how this blade looks. So ultimately, I think the original blade that we checked out on the Stitch V2, in terms of raw flipping performance, does flip better. I think it's just a little bit a little bit better balanced, but I'm willing to give up some of that performance because this blade is just so damn sexy. It's so nice, and I really do like it. The jimping is probably my other biggest complaint on here, because while the zippy spacers do have positive jimping on them, which means that the jimping sticks out further than it does the handles, you can actually see the jimping if you look on the side profile here. The surface area on the side of the handles for the jimping isn't much. You can see that it's maybe even less than half of the overall surface area of the width of the balisong. And I find that it just doesn't give a ton of grip because of that. My fingers are still rubbing quite a bit on these sides here. But besides that, I guess I do also wish that this side went down a little bit more, because I'm someone who I don't ladder on the very tip of the balisong handle like that. I prefer to move my fingers down a little bit more. So I do wish there was a little bit more real estate in the jimping on this side. But beside those things, and besides the T8 screws at the end of the handles, I really like this thing. I enjoy that you can tinker with it so much. You know, for $450-ish, you're getting a fully done balisong, you're getting adjustable weights, you're getting the ability to swap a Kraken blade on here, or swap this blade onto Kraken handles, I think, or Bxndxge even teased that you could maybe even do the gauze on these handles. There's a lot that you can do, so I definitely think with all the moving pieces here, it's worth the price, especially, you know, Bxndxge designing it and then getting the parts manufactured and then working with Zippy for the spacers and then putting it together himself. There's a lot of moving pieces here. So I think it is worth the asking price, and I am more than stoked to own one. And I think it's fun enough, but I don't think that this is going to knock... I don't think this is going to knock my socks off in the same way that the Slift T did for the price. So ultimately, the Stitch V2 becomes a balisong where I think the original blade does flip a little better. And in terms of recommendations, if this is a balisong that you think would interest you, it probably will. If this is something that seems cool to you, if this is something you'd want to tinker with, you'll probably like it. If not, if you're more of a fan of a balisong where you just open it up and it has the balance that it has and you don't really mess with a bunch of stuff, maybe it won't be as appealing to you. Maybe it won't hold as much value to you. But I do think it flips well enough that this is going to be a very cherished piece in my collection, because, like I said, with the Kukri blade, I am more than stoked to own a Stitch of my own. So, huge thank you to Bxndxge for sending this thing out. And thank you guys for watching. I will see you all in the next one. Later.